Good evening, everybody. Welcome to In Deep on FTR Radio. If you are not in chat, you should join us there. It's ftrradio.com/chat. I am joined tonight by Michi Iljazi from the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. Once again, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
As usual, always welcome here. So I have two guests tonight, which is a rare thing for me. And as much as I would love to comment on all of the Trump turmoil this week, I'm not going to. Because we have bigger, better, more important things to talk about. And one of those things is a blog post that Taxpayers Protection Alliance put out this week commemorating all of the wonderful waste and fraud that occurred during Katrina. This being the 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, and seemed a fitting time to talk about that. Before we get to what's in the blog post, though, and what TPA is proposing as solutions to the fiasco that was the government response to Katrina, I want to talk about Obama made a speech today where he said that New Orleans is recovering from Katrina. Now, I don't know if you can comment on this personally or wearing your TPA hat, but I have friends in New Orleans. I have friends in New Orleans who are well below the middle-class American income line, who were there during Katrina, who lost everything during Katrina. 10 years later, these people are not doing fine. They are very blessed to have a lot of family and friends to help them out, but they still deal every day with the aftermath of Katrina. Economically, in their community, crime rate in their community was so bad in the 3 years following Katrina that they literally walked away from everything they had managed to salvage and relocated to avoid how bad things were after Katrina. And even though they were able to get away from the neighborhood they were in, the neighborhood they moved to, which was about 8 miles away from the Ninth Ward, is not a lot better economically speaking. So before we get into the debacle that was, I don't know how much research you put into what the economy looks like now in New Orleans and the areas particularly affected by Katrina, but I don't see recovery and I don't hear recovery, a full-on recovery like Obama made it sound during his speech.
No, I think, I'm glad you actually brought that up before we start, because it's perfect timing, too, to talk about this with the president giving the speech. And, this is very common from President Obama, whether he's talking about New Orleans, whether he's talking about the country in general, and the idea that we're in this recovery mode when we're really not. And the Wall Street Journal had a piece today talking about New Orleans and the revival a decade after, and the title is An Unfinished Riff. And I think that tells you right there all you need to know about the supposed recovery. The population has rebounded, which is great. It's about 90% of pre-Katrina level. But the fact of the matter is that with the $135 billion, the rebuilding that's really coming to the end, these government jobs and a lot of these, skewed wages that were put in, and a lot in the the retail and entertainment services industry. The fact of the matter is like you said, there's a wide economic divide in New Orleans, and there are still problems with poverty being ridiculously high. And you have, even though it's about the incomes are compared with 1999, they're below. The problem is that, like you said, for people who have lost, they really haven't recovered, whether you look at the fact of the poverty level, whether you look at the fact of the jobs numbers, whether you look at the fact of all the billions of dollars that was put in, and you have all of these statistics that really just tell the same story, that the population may be coming back, and people may be coming back to New Orleans, but for the people that really had a lot taken from them, there's many people who haven't recovered. And that's where you get to really the waste part, because then we get into, well, what did we do there? What did we put in all of this recovery effort for?
Right. So I don't think a lot of people realize, and it was only 10 years ago, which to me doesn't seem like a lot, but I remember because I've lived in New Orleans, I lived on the West Bank, and my father was stationed there when I was younger. And I mean, I know what living in New Orleans is actually like, and I know I was there during Hugo, and I know even what a moderate hurricane can do. And so I watched in horror what happened during Katrina. And right after Katrina, not right after, a month or two after Katrina, when the federal machine finally appeared to get some of its act together and get down there, I don't think a lot of people realized that the money that initially should have been available, ready, waiting to be deployed for immediate relief never went. It didn't make it there immediately. And so some of that money got rolled into, for lack of a better term, shovel-ready redevelopment projects. And these projects are exactly what they sounded like. There was a lot of infrastructure damage. There was a lot of home damage that was covered under FEMA for rebuilding. There was a lot of intermediate need for housing that was covered under FEMA, and all of these things needed to be constructed and erected quickly. And so this money flowed into New Orleans, and these shovel-ready jobs have really been stretched out. For the first 3 years, they were a big part of the severely damaged area's income. But they have been stretched out for almost 10 years now. And now these jobs, all of this infrastructure rebuilding, this fortification that has been going on the government dime is coming to an end. I mean, literally coming to this complete end. And so these jobs that the government has been paying these people to do don't exist anymore. And while I think that America's rally around the downtrodden spirit really showed after Katrina and has endured, I don't think anyone has forgotten New Orleans. I think that people have forgotten the fact that this money, these jobs, were never going to be permanent. And the focus on what should have been rebuilt in New Orleans was one of the biggest failings, one of the biggest wastes, where this money ended up going and where it ended up not going. So let's talk about where the money went.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk, and I just want to bring up really quick to finish off your point. When you talk about the rebuilding and those jobs, those jobs now for rebuilding, for major rebuilding projects, it's down below pre-storm levels. So you're absolutely right that the boom was there, but it was because of the damage. And now those jobs aren't permanent and they're not coming back. So when you look at really the waste, we talk about it in the blog post, and we list a few things from a New York Times piece that did an investigative reporting, and it was less than a year after the storm. It was in June of 2006, so less than a year. And that was when it was, just in the beginning, when we look at the $19 billion that FEMA put in Hurricane Katrina and Rita, but, coupling them together. But when we look at some of the stuff for Katrina, everybody knows some of these. The first one we list is, I think, one that everybody knows, the mobile homes that just essentially just sat empty. I mean,
right.
Just everywhere. And that amounted to $500 million just for the mobile homes. And that was all over TV. So that was one that was clearly there. $10 million in rental and disaster relief assistance that was essentially given to Gulf Coast area prison inmates. So, we see some problems with how the money is allocated, not just what it's being spent on. And you also have a lot of fraud, and there was about $2 billion in fraud, which represented about 11% of that $19 billion that they had tracked. So, it wasn't just a problem with what they were spending on, but it was also, as you said, how they allocated it. The accountability just wasn't there to track it and oversee it.
Right. There was, so in effect, FEMA was completely unprepared for a disaster the magnitude of Katrina. And this is not the first nor since been the last time that FEMA has been ill prepared for what it is they exist to do, the purpose they exist to do. Katrina is a massive explainer of how not to handle a natural disaster. Now, whether or not you think FEMA should exist is irrelevant right at this moment. But as far as I
They
can
did
tell,
exist. Yeah,
right, they did
exist. So that's
exist.
why it was. Yeah.
Right. And so up until now, I have not seen, and in reading the blog post, one of the things that really blew my mind is that it was inescapable that they were not prepared and that the money was poorly allocated and poorly kept track of. And so you mentioned in the blog post that they spent $247 million trying to create a logistics system to be able to better track the availability and movement of inventory and money and how these things are spent, only to find that this $247 million logistics system couldn't interface with the existing systems in place and was therefore relatively useless. So it's not only that they're not prepared, but they didn't seem to be all that they haven't come very far since then.
No, and it's really sad when you talk about the logistics supply chain management system, because it was supposed to address problems that were apparent from Hurricane Katrina, but obviously they're spending nearly $250 million on something, and it's actually not going to work. They're not going to be able to track and locate the emergency supplies. You're not going to be able to improve on the problems that you had. And the life cycle spending of that system is far more than $247 million. And so we continue to throw money away on these, programs and new things when really, like you said, this is what's really important too, I think, the legacy of Katrina is that at the state level, we should never forget the absolute and utter failure at the state level too, to be wholly unprepared for this, top to bottom, the leadership.
Right.
And that caused problems for the federal government too, because as the states are telling the federal government, hey, we got this, they don't have it. And it was very apparent early on that they didn't. And when the federal government wasn't prepared either, that was a big problem. So it really calls into question the fact that when we talk about natural disasters, you can only prepare so much right before they happen. So states and federal governments who have that authority, if those mechanisms are in place, whether we like them or not, and we're paying for them, they have to be able to do the job that we're paying them to do. And that's where we talk about the Prepare Act, which was introduced. Right. And we actually had our member of Congress, Matt Cartwright, who sponsored, Democrat from Pennsylvania, who sponsored it. And this is just to streamline the process to make sure that this is, I'm not comparing tragedies, but after 9/11, one of the big problems that everybody said was agency communication and the fact that there are these artificial walls built up because everybody wants a piece of the same pot of money.
Right.
And the Prepare Act is there to say, look, FEMA, look, all these other agencies, we can't have these artificial walls. We can't have people competing. We all need to be working together because we can't have the scenes that we saw 10 years ago happen again, because that was just heartbreaking. Even if you don't know anybody, even if you're not personally affected, you're affected as an individual and as someone who lives in the United States of America. I mean, those images just were horrifying to watch on TV.
They were absolutely horrifying to watch. And like you said, everyone is impacted financially. Now, the ripple that Katrina left economically obviously doesn't just impact New Orleans. It doesn't just impact Louisiana. Alabama, Mississippi, a lot of the Gulf Coast was impacted. Money was sent elsewhere, which,
Florida.
The economy, the whole, the ripple effect. I mean, there's whole industries that were impacted for years, down there. And so the Prepare Act is something that TPA is signing off on, in support of, particularly, like you said, because it breaks down the barriers of communication with the sole purpose of making FEMA be able to logistically take control in a situation like this and function the way it's supposed to. I actually haven't read it yet, so that's on my to-do list for tomorrow. Thanks a lot. But before we go, because we only have like 2 minutes left. You guys have something else you want to talk about? Yeah, something we brought up a lot on the show.
Just wanted to plug really quick that we're coming down to the deadline for the expiration on the Internet Access Taxes moratorium. It's passed in the House. We need people to encourage their members of the Senate to take up the bill. This is an easy fix. This is something that has bipartisan agreement. Doesn't seem to be something President Obama is willing to wag his finger at and threaten to shut down the government over. So we need people to contact their senators, get them on board, because this is something that could really affect taxpayers all over the country. Everybody uses the internet, and we don't need to have new taxes just for going online. So we hope everybody will do what they can, because TPA is certainly keeping our eye on the ball on this one, and we appreciate your help on it too, Michelle.
Okay. Well, where can everybody find you online and on Twitter?
At www.protectingtaxpayers.org, and we redesigned the website a little bit. Got a lot of new stuff on there, and it's got a little bit of a new look, so I encourage people to go look. And then at Twitter, they can find us at Protect Taxpayers with 1 T. And I'm at Michi83.
And you guys will always find them in my Follow Fridays. You can follow me at Goldsgirl and FTR Radio at FTR2_ radio. We are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about the economy a little bit. Be right back.